Welcome. Today is August 27th, 2019. It is midnight Mountain Standard Time, 11 a.m. Pacific. You are listening to Counterculture with Aaron Lujan. Today's title is Introducing a 6-part series, How to Break Free from Our Slavery to Big Food, Big Media, Big Pharma, Big Government, Big Money, and big education, just big everything. Thank you for joining me, you guys. If you are watching this live, we are live on YouTube, and we're also live on Facebook. This is being recorded as a podcast. The podcast is available on all the major podcast players: Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Podbean, etc. Everything is archived at aaronlujan.com. I'm going to be starting a series, episode 38, 39, 40, 41, 42, and 43 will each have a guest who's a subject matter expert on the form of bondage, the type of slavery that we as a culture and as a society are currently under. I am of the opinion, and I have the belief, that most of us are slaves. Now, let me preface this by saying the word slave, or the concept of slavery, at least for myself, I would generally associate with physical chains. We think of roots, we think to the time in our history here in the United States when we had a group of people that were property, and that didn't have any sort of natural or physical freedom, was not able to choose. And I'm not referring to that type of slavery. So let us get the definitions clear. Slavery is when you are subject to another's authority and their authority has control over your choice. So you're unable to make your own choices because somebody who wants to control your behavior has been able to enslave you. And that doesn't necessarily mean physical chains. That could mean mental slavery. And the best way to describe this, you guys, are the original Matrix movies. I love the Matrix series. And I remember watching the Matrix for... I think it was, probably the first time. And someone had suggested to me after I had watched the film that it was art imitating life. And it was alluding to this idea that we as a culture under a mass hypnosis, that we are in a matrix. If you guys remember the Keanu Reeves film, there were people in essentially this artificial computer simulation where they didn't have the knowledge that they were actually inside of this artificial program, inside of this computer application, that they believed that the world around them and the choices that they made were real, or the reality around them was real and the choices that they made were their own. And what the film poked a hole in, if you remember at the end, Keanu got into the Matrix and disrupted it and exposed the fact that there was a wizard behind the curtain. And in reality, everyone was actually inside of a program. Now, that was science fiction, and none of us genuinely believe, most of us at least with sane minds, do not believe that we are in a computer program. However, I'm arguing today and introducing my series in the next 6 podcasts that we may not be in an artificial computer program, but we are in a socially engineered, master planned reality that is the culture today. And we are slaves to our appetites, and those appetites are being manipulated by institutional powers, be it corporations, be it government, that are doing so to create outcomes in the culture that will benefit those that are in control, those at the steering wheel, or at least they think they're in control. And I'm arguing that myself included, and you who are under my voice right now, you are a slave more than likely to most of these 6 forms of bondage. And I'll repeat them. We are slaves to big food. And when I say big, when I use the word big, I'm referring to large industry. I'm referring to, in the case of food, industrial food, big food, the Krogers of the world, the Heinz's of the world, the major food manufacturers, the people, Dole Fruit. Okay, sorry for the interruption, guys. My hashtag Ghetto Podcast. When I'm referring to big media, I'm referring to the news media. I'm referring to marketing, Madison Avenue, as they call it, big marketing. I'm referring to pornography. When you consider 3 out of the top 10 most trafficked websites in the world are pornography sites, that has significant impact on our minds, on our culture. I'm also referring to children's programming. I'm also referring to any sort of media, be it film, be it television, through traditional means is full, and I don't have time to troubleshoot. So we'll figure this out, you guys. You are watching a podcast without a producer. Big pharma. When you consider that a majority of the population the adult population is on some form of prescription medication, and we have an opioid epidemic across the board, we are under the thumb of big pharma, big government. Here in the United States, we have a bloated, large, oppressive government that is a threat to our God-given rights, inalienable rights. Big money, loans, debt, banking, the investment world, and then lastly, big education, universities, the public school system, modern education as we know it. I'm here to make the argument that we are all slaves to more than likely a majority of these forms of bondage, and I want to explore each one individually and provide a solution for each one of us to be able to escape this. None of us want to be slaves. We want to be free people. Our ancestors in this country at one point were probably the most free people in history. And our generation, as we are here in 2019, have lost a lot of those freedoms in the last 2 or 3 generations as a result of this. And a lot of this is prefaced on this idea of cultural Marxism, which I'll get into in the next few episodes. So the purpose of today was really to introduce the series. I'm not really going to get into a lot of detail on each one. I just wanted to make the declaration that that's what the next 6 podcasts are going to be about. I'm going to spend the next few minutes kind of going over each one briefly, although I kind of already did, and then just kind of discuss this idea that our slavery today is fractional, invisible, and voluntary. And let me back up. This was inspired by a blog from The Third Way Man. So I want to give credit to the author. If you go to thirdwayman.com, I believe it is, or the Third Way Man blog, he put out on July 4th, Independence Day, this blog outlining these ideas, and it resonated with me and it inspired me to produce a series on it. So if you're listening, Third Way Man, thank you very much. Today's modern slavery is fractional. So if you remember this idea of slavery in its old construct where you were under physical chains, today, in that time, you had one owner. And the problem with that is that particular slave owner ran the risk of revolt and revolution when all of the liability and the responsibility of the slave owner was on one slave owner. But today it's fractional, therefore slavery is much more effective. So if you think of fractional jets, timeshares, with the concept of timeshares, most people understand that there isn't just one owner, but there's multiple owners that get to use that property. no, not one person owns it, but they all benefit from that particular timeshare property. And that's how slavery works today. It's fractional in that our slave masters, be it the bank, be it the porn producer, be it the food manufacturer who's pumping our body with genetically modified food, they all have us in bondage. We all are under their control, however that may look depending on that particular slave owner, but they're all sharing joint ownership over each one of us. That's the reason why slavery today is more effective, and it's why it's invisible. It's invisible. There's not physical change, therefore it's deceptive. The best example I could think of is a mousetrap. Because the mousetrap represents the voluntary nature of our slavery today. So I'm arguing that we're able to be slaves because we volunteer our servitude due to cultural norms, rituals, and addiction. I think of the mousetrap. When the mouse sees the cheese on the trap, he's not looking at the trap beneath the piece of cheese, he's looking at the cheese. And like the mouse, we are being lulled to sleep. We are being tempted by our appetites and our lusts for the things that will satisfy our appetites, but the end game is abject slavery. So let's start with this concept of big food. Today, our cancer rates, our diabetes, our heart disease, our fatigues, and our obesity rates are through the roof. If you look at any sort of historical comparison, there has never been a time in history where so many people have these illnesses. And I'm going to argue that's because of the food. And we're going to have an expert on the show who really understands this better than anyone on how the food is causing all of these diseases and why modern food today is enslaving us. A lot of these foods have neurotoxins. So our actual thoughts, our sleep, our mood is being altered by the food that we eat. The old saying, you are what you eat. We're becoming crap because we eat crap. Sound like the old neighbor. Hey, cut out the crap. Fast food, genetically modified foods, the hormones, the chemical additives, the massive amounts of processed sugar, the lack of living foods in our diet. These are all of the ingredients of death that we're putting into our bodies, and we're doing it because it's convenient. We're doing it because it's customary, it's normal. Most of the food today, especially in the industrialized nations, is microwavable and processed because our society has moved to a point where it would be disadvantageous to be eating good, healthy, living foods. Sorry, guys, just getting more difficulty with the podcast. Moving along, I would argue that food is the number one priority because it affects your health and your well-being. Second slave master is big media. And media is broken down, as I mentioned a moment ago, news, marketing, entertainment, etc. News is weaponized. I'm going to bring specific declassified operations that were declassified via national security to prove to you that the information that we're being spoon-fed by the quote-unquote news media is actually weaponized propaganda. Executive orders that were passed by past presidents that made it legal to propagandize the American public. You guys, this isn't me speculating out of some sort of conspiracy theory forum. These are actual declassified documents. These are actual publicly available executive orders. I am not speculating here on counterculture. I am giving you facts that you can look up yourself to understand that mainstream news media is not journalism. It's weaponized propaganda to advance the interests of foreign policy, of corporations, etc. Weaponized news media highlights evil. It causes despair, anxiety, mass post-traumatic stress disorder. Outside of news, we have entertainment. Modern day film and television shows are actual cultural programming that's being used to change attitudes, to make us more evil, to have us turn away from God, to have us turn away from our families, to bring us into a vulnerable point where we can be conquerable people. The destructiveness of pornography and how pornography is such a destructive and mass influence on our culture, unlike we've ever seen, due to the advent of the internet and how accessible pornography is, and how those who are addicted to pornography or watch pornography regularly cannot function as normal, productive people in society. And I'm going to back this up with scientific research, where brain scans have been done and studies have been verified that prove these points. Marketing, social media. I talked a few episodes ago how social media jacks with our brains, and brain studies have shown that the same pathways that are created by cocaine and shrooms and DMT and these hardcore drugs are the same pathways that are created by Facebook and Instagram. The little red dot, ooh, did I get a notification? And how we're all on edge and we're all being controlled by these, by media, by social media. And then marketing. I'm going to have someone on who's maybe a marketing professional or an academic who studies this, how consumerism and the messages from Madison Avenue is you don't have enough. You're constantly in the state of lack. You're constantly in this state of ineptitude, of not being good enough, that there's a deficiency within you. Because as a marketer, I can tell you and attest to this, and I don't participate. I follow my own trail, but mainstream marketing and Madison Avenue and modern thought in marketing is you want to make people feel lacking. I can't think of the word right now, but inept, missing something, in order to convince you that if you just buy their product, you will be better. Big pharma, opioid epidemic, the antidepressant epidemic, how medical bills are the number one cause of bankruptcy, how the healthcare system is really the sick management system, how you can take somebody who arguably is relatively healthy and turn them into a dead person very quickly by just sending them to a American hospital. We are in this vicious cycle of poor health. We live in a culture where the culture convinces you that if you just take this pill, it'll free you from all of life's pains, and how big pharma and the sick management monsters just destroying us literally with our physical health. Then I'll discuss big government and how we are all slaves to big government. Our money's being stolen from us via taxation. If you ever read your paycheck stub at the end of your pay period and look at all of the deductions, you will see who your master is. Social Security, guess what? That was how the Iraq War was paid. And if you're under the age of probably 50, you ain't getting no Social Security. It's a giant Ponzi scheme, not my opinion. It's pure mathematics. Pure mathematics. Again, I will have a guest on who's an expert in big government. I have a really big guest I'm going to invite. He's actually incredibly famous. I'm hoping he says yes. I'm going to be inviting some famous people on, you guys, so you don't want to miss it. And not just listen because they're famous, but they're famous for being experts and really knowing their junk on all this junk that I'm sharing with you today. So our big government guest will talk about how red tape and bureaucracy and big government breeds the black market and crime, and how big government creates or discourages entrepreneurship and hurts the economy, and how the economy would be doing so much better, like the time when John F. Kennedy slashed the federal tax rates, and the income of the revenue that the federal government received when President Kennedy reduced the federal income tax rates, it actually caused an increase in revenue. So these are some of the counter ideas that maybe your history teacher in high school never told you because you were under the thumb of big education at the time. And big government makes us less safe. Big government likes wars. They like troops in multiple countries. And many studies and CIA experts have told us that our involvement in other countries creates what's called blowback, unintended or maybe intended consequences of more war. So how big government makes us less safe, and how we're slaves to the big government as we lose our freedom. Because the only way government can expand is for more bureaucracy, more laws, and usually with more bureaucracy, more laws means less freedom. It's that whole principle that George Washington said. George Washington equated government to a fire. That if you government's like a campfire, if you keep it small and under control, it can be very valuable. It can keep you warm. It can cook your food. However, if a fire gets out of control, it can consume you. That's how government operates. I like government small. Second to last is big money. I'm talking about how the Federal Reserve, the people who print the cash, the people who dictate interest rates, they are neither federal nor do they have any reserves. And how our economy is based on paper. It's what you would call a fiat currency system, and how all fiat currency systems are giant Ponzi schemes that fail, and how everything is built on debt, and how debt creates inflation, and how inflation reduces purchasing power. So in other words, because of big money, you work harder, you have less to save, you're spending more on food, you're spending more on gas, you have less money to get ahead, your cost of housing goes up, and you struggle. And you have friends like me who we watch their kids and they come over to pick them up. They can't be with their kids, they can't afford daycare, and they come exhausted because we got a two-parent household where if we go back 60, 70 years, American families were thriving off one income. Why is it that the American family is struggling on two incomes? Well, I'll tell you in the Big Money episode, it's because of inflation and the reduction of purchasing power, and you will understand. And if you guys are like me and a lot of these concepts are foreign and confusing, stick around for the next couple episodes, you guys. We're going to have subject matter experts who are going to explain it so a guy like me can understand. And if a guy like me can understand, definitely you guys could understand, because many of you guys out there are way smarter than I am. So this is kind of like a culture for beginners, if you will, these next 6 episodes, and talk about how I'm gonna actually tell you my personal debt story and how I'm in debt, and how I'm a slave because the Bible says a borrower is a slave to the lender. Lastly, we're gonna touch on big education and how schools no longer actually provide an education, but what they do is they create worker bees. They create obedient citizens who will do what they're told and consume. I will get into detail with my education expert on how modern education is built on an industrial age model. If you remember the progression of history and innovation, we went from an agrarian society for hundreds, if not arguably thousands of years, up until the turn of the 19th century, when we became what was called an industrial society, where people left the farms in the rural areas and started moving into cities and started creating these metropolitans. And the advent of modern finance and the invention of all of this industrial technology that concentrated wealth within cities. And what it did was it required a workforce in the industrial age to be good worker bees. So at that time, they created schools where you'd have 20, 30 people in one room, and they were all taught to memorize, and they were all taught to take tests, and they were all valued on their fact regurgitation, because if you could do that, you would be a very valuable asset in the industrial era. Well, we now live in a new era. We live in the information age as a result of, I guess we call it the early 90s and the 20th century. We ushered in, or I guess the 80s, the information age, and how our educational system is not equipped to educate people. And this is the reason why we're failing and why we have so many people with multiple master's degrees who can't find jobs. And what we're not preparing people for and children are problem solving, creative thinking, learning from your failures. These are all things that are now assets in the information age, yet we don't have an education system that does that. And we're going to talk about the student loan debt and how that's kept people in bondage. Because if you don't pay your loans, they will garnish your wages and they will seize your property. Believe me. Believe me. It's the greatest. Not preparing kids for the real world, just employment. So I'm going to end with this, you guys. We're about almost 30 minutes into this podcast. It'll be a short one tonight. Choice is the escape. Get tired. Get mad. Desire true freedom. You guys, recently, the start of the new year, I gave up sugar. I just felt like my body was saying, you know what? It just doesn't feel good. It's not right for me. And it was hard in the beginning because we live in a culture where sugar is such a part of modern diet and food. I will cheat on birthdays. I will cheat on holidays. So I always make sure I crack out on holidays and birthdays and things like that. So my wife's birthday is coming up in a few days. And tomorrow's my wedding anniversary. So on those types of events, we will be doing sugar. But my point in saying all of this, you guys, is that I have experienced a level of freedom to be able to say no that I didn't know existed. I didn't know that there would be this great feeling of being able to exercise self-control. And then the benefit that came from getting rid of sugar, which has for me been better sleep and just a better feeling of well-being. And I haven't seen a doctor yet, but I'm sure there's other health benefits. That's just a small example of saying no to big food. Just a few months ago, I started my own business after working 11 years in digital marketing. It's been tough, but not having a boss, not being answerable to a corporation or an authority, there is so much freedom in that, you guys. Freedom. I can't explain it to you. You have to experience it. You just got to get tired of being fat. You got to get tired of that 9 to 5 paycheck to paycheck life. You got to get tired of paying that $300 or $400 or $500 bill to the bank that you've been paying for months upon years upon years. You got to look at others who are free and see their joy and see their lifestyle and say, I want that for myself. I want that for my family. You got to get mad enough, right? We are slaves to our appetites. Therefore, we need new appetites. This comes from recognizing the chains, recognizing our choices are making us slaves. Our instincts are making us slaves. Our habits are making us slaves. The chemistry that's been rewired in our brains and in our bodies are making us slaves. Not participating in the culture anymore, getting new friends, surrounding yourself with different people, canceling certain things, turning certain things off, turning certain things on. That's how we get free, you guys. And it's going to be very practical. You know, I'm going to be, and our guests are going to be providing resources that have been proven to be effective to help people out of some of these bondages that we're under, whether it be they're under debt, whether it be they're obese, whether it be they are in a school where they're not really getting an education, certain facets of big government that they're participating in that they can get around, being able to replace pharmaceutical drugs with maybe natural medication, other sources of media, or exposing the slave master media that you're under and waking you up, changing our food habits. This is what we're going to be pointing out in the next 6 episodes, you guys. So that's where we're going with it. The title of today's podcast, episode 37, introducing a 6-part series, how to break free from our slavery to big food, big media, big pharma, big government, big money, and big education. I'm not sure who our first guest is going to be. I'm not sure which will be our very first episode, but I'm hoping that we'll have this in about a week. You guys, the podcast is on all the major podcast players. Counterculture with Aaron Lujan. Everything is archived at aaronlujan.com. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for letting me rant for about a half hour. I'm a talker. It's what I love to do. And good night.